Someone recently said to me, white history is important too. What would be your response to this? I think this is a great
question. Made me laugh so much. Like, to be honest, it gives me like All Lives Matter vibes of like, why are you teaching about anything else? Like, white history is important too. And like, no one's saying it's not important, firstly. And like, just because we're all sat here discussing South Asian history, we're not in any way saying, oh, white history is lesser and we shouldn't learn about it. We're saying, no, other things are also important and should be put on the same level as white history. But then again, I also think it's important to question what white history really means. Like, one of the most important things I learned as a student was how important it is to be critical of the narratives that you're being taught, and to understand how intersectional history is. So, for example, I remember someone described the British Empire and empire history as white history. And like, okay, sure, it's got the word British in the title, like the British Empire, but is it white history? Like, it's obviously not. It's about all the other countries that were colonized and plundered, and it then links to immigration and nationalism. And obviously it's so much more than just Britain, and even then Britain isn't white. Like, it's a very diverse place. So yeah, no one's saying that the white history, whatever the definition of that is, isn't important. I just think, and actually I think if you were looking at it as, okay, that is white history, like for example, British Empire history is white history, it's still very important to be taught about, but it's just also important to interrogate the way that we're taught that history. So yes, okay, in this case, you're for example, you're saying the British Empire history is white history, but it's also South Asian history. Like, British history is South Asian history. They're very interlinked, and that's why we need to look at history from different perspectives, because you need to appreciate that piece of history at more than just like a surface level of understanding of the past and the people that inhabited it. So yeah, I don't, depending how you define what white history is, I feel like I understand from the way the question was phrased what they mean by that. But yeah, I don't think you can really say that any part of history is just white, because everything is influenced by everything else and everything is intertwined. But if we were to look at it as like from that perspective and that lens of white history, I think it is very important, but we're always taught it from one way. And I think we need to broaden our understanding and how we're taught history, and how it needs to become much more holistic, and less Eurocentric.
Yeah, definitely. I can give you an example actually that's not to do with South Asian history, but you know, when I think when that person has said, "What about white history?" In my head, I don't know why, but in my head, when I think of white history, I think of the Tudors, and I think of Henry VIII.
Yeah, like Henry VIII.
That's a classic school history thing, right? And then actually, it's really interesting because actually, there's been a lot of extensive research and books have been written about Black Tudors, and about the fact that there were lots of people of African descent living in Tudor England. And I posted about one of them actually.
I remember, I think I went to like some museum or like a heritage house or something, and it had that woman in it. And when I saw your post, I was like, yeah, I know about her.
Yeah, so I think it's exactly what you said, Hawwa, which is that, you know, there's actually so much history that is already taught that just needs to be broadened out to include all the other voices and the people that were there at the time. So for example, you can still teach Tudor history, but also teach about the fact that there were people of African descent living in Britain at the time, like John Blank, who I posted about the other day. So I think it's just this idea that it's this idea of, like you said, being critical, but also understanding that there is so much research that's happening in history all the time that we can't just stick to what is in the textbooks or what has always been taught. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think someone saying like, what about white history, means that they haven't been taught a different narrative of that history, because obviously that history, like for example the Tudors, people think of it as white, but it wasn't, like you said. So the fact that they're saying, oh, what about white history, means that they've not been taught much more than just the basic things that you are taught at school from a very like one-sided perspective.
I think one of the mistakes that I think schools have made is that when they're teaching diverse history, whether it's South Asian history or Black history, it's always as like a separate thing. So it's always like an add-on, or so now we're going to do like a diverse unit or a unit on Black history, rather than having it running through as a golden thread through all of their history curriculum. So like what Shalina's just said about the Tudors, you can be looking at Black history in that unit. So it doesn't always have to be separate to, you know, the rest of your curriculum. It has to be running through everything that you're doing. So essentially white history, black history and brown history are not separate. They're all linked in whatever way you look at it.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because even at uni, our module courses were always split up into like weeks per theme, and there was always like 1 week on race and 1 week on gender, and that was it. Like, it wasn't very, like, it was literally just a 1 week on, okay, now we're not going to talk about white people, and that was it. So when we did stuff on like economic history, it was always separate, and then it was like race, and I'm like, yeah, but what about all the people of color that contributed to the economy? Or, you know, like, why it's always very like put into boxes and categorized? And I feel like it just needs to become, like you said, like running through the entire course, because I think that's one thing. I mean, to be honest, those weeks were my favorite, because I was like, yeah, you're not British history, or like not really white history. So kind of hypocritical, because I always wrote my essays on them because I loved the topic, but it still frustrated me from like an outsider perspective of, why is it just 1 week? Like, every single course had 1 week on race and 1 week on gender. And then if it was a course on, for example, there was a course on like civil rights or something like that, then that was just separate again by itself. Like, it wasn't very integrated into the whole course.
It means people can opt out, doesn't it? So it means that if you chose not to do that essay on gender, for example, it means that you've then sort of analysed that particular period or whatever without considering, you know, without considering the role of women, for example, because it's so separated.